I was born in Oberlin on January the 1st, 1935, which was the same day my dad was born. And everybody always asked me, are you the first baby born? I was the father of the first baby born the first 6 months in Oberlin. In Oberlin itself, Oberlin was a small town, really didn't have a hospital or anything else in it.
So all these years you were telling me that you've had very few birthday parties, but this one upcoming might be the second or third, huh?
It'll be the third one.
Happy birthday to you.
I think the first one I ever had was Faye and Kirby Guidry had a birthday party at their house. They lived in the Oak Hills. And the next one I had was a group of us went to Aspen. And I'll never forget the Batemans. We were going to be there with January 1st, so the Batemans bought some green T-shirts for everybody on the trip. There were about 40 of us. It says, "Today is Norman's birthday," and bought a red one for me that says, "I'm Norman." And it was kind of funny because when I go in the restaurants on the mountainside and I'd walk in there and everybody says, "Gosh, dog, I wondered who in the heck Norman was. The dinner's on the house." So I did pretty good. I made a few extra stops at restaurants that day.
That was, when you say 40 people, that was before or after probably after we all went with Lorio's and them, huh?
That was during the times that we were all, your family and our family and all of us were going. That's when lift tickets at Aspen were $15. The first time I went skiing there, the ticket was $9, and now I think they're over $200.
I'm gonna go back to this Oberlin. It seemed like a lot of people from Syria, Lebanon, descended in Allen Parish. Kind of give a background. How did that come to be in that part of Louisiana? What was the draw?
Well, I think that what happened was a small group came over and they established little businesses and all. And then when their relatives or friends were coming over, they would come over and stay with them. And as soon as they got their feet on the ground, they would move to the next little town and start their own little business. And it just got so if you start from Alexander on down, every little town had a Lebanese family that had a little business that they started. Well, Oberlin is a little town of only about 1,200 people. Growing up, I remember growing up, lived in a little house that was not painted. The only running water in the house was in the kitchen. There's no electricity, no gas. It was just a small little country town. Not a lot. It was a parish seat, so the only real thing there was you either worked in the parish courthouse, or you taught school, or you worked on the farm, and that was about it. Oberlin is between Lake Charles and Alexander on Highway 165. It's about 40 miles from Alexander and about 35 miles to Lake Charles.
It's almost like you have to be going there to come across it.
You may have been through Oberlin and didn't know it.
So what did your parents do, Norman? And let me ask you this, were they first generation here in America, or were they born in Lebanon?
My dad was first generation. He came here when he was 16 years old and lived with his first cousin and worked for them till he accumulated enough, and then he opened up his own little store. He had a grocery store. My mom grew up in Church Point. I think she was probably third generation in America. Her father was French and German, and her mother was German, French, and English. And my grandfather was a carpenter, so he moved to Oberlin. There were several little projects that they'd ask him to come bid on. One of them was a church and a parish hall, and that's what he did his whole lifetime at Oberlin.
You think that's where you got your mentality for construction? I mean,
it probably is. I remember I'd go to some of the places that he was working, and in order to keep me out of trouble, he'd give me a couple of 2x4s and a hammer and a sack of nails, and I just stay there all day just nailing nails and 2x4s and all.
And there's something about a young boy, I did the same, and there's something about a kid, tools, and and building stuff, or sometimes demobbing it, but building stuff, it just gets in you, and you get to where you like that, right?
When I was about 12 years old, I used to make some pretty decent little money building chicken brooders. I mean, everything's square, so it wasn't like you had to cut rafters or anything. But, Coca-Cola used to have signs all over, those tin signs that were just about the right size. And I'd just make little frames and all that. And I'd build a whole chicken brooder and sell them.
Yeah, you were about 12, you said?
I was about 12.
You probably built dog houses, other things like that.
Dog houses, hog pens. I always liked to build things.
Yeah, no, I gathered that, and I see you passing on to your sons too. That's cool, that the whole engineering mindset. And so your grandfather, what was your grandma and grandfather's name on either side? Do you recall? Yeah.
My grandfather was Leon Hanks, and my grandfather was Amina Smith.
Growing up there, you worked a little bit at the store and a little bit just tooling around, or what? Tell me about what you did on weekends and all.
On weekends, I usually help my dad in the store. My grandfather didn't do anything on weekends. They just worked during the week, but I usually helped him around the store. When people built things back then, they had a little pride built in them. I mean, their houses that stood for 100 years, and you did very little of it, maybe repair the roof or something sometimes and all. I was thinking about that the other day. They do things now that they build in obsolescence on things. You know how long it's going to last?
I wonder if any of those chicken things you built are still around.
Probably not. Probably too late. Well, what's funny is after all those years, I came to LSU, went in the Army, worked on. Now I have a chicken coop in my backyard.
Yeah, I know. But that's how life is, and a lot of times full circle stuff,
Yeah,
right?
it does.
Yeah, I know
It does.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So, and you were what number of the kids?
I was number 5. There was Ed, Ailey, Lewis, Ruth, me, and then the younger one, Philip.
6 kids, and
6
you were the
kids.
second youngest.
I was the second youngest.
Tell me about you got along with your siblings for the most part?
Oh, I got along great. Never had any problems at all. We were just a big, happy family. Enough age difference in us that, the older ones looked out for the younger ones and things like that. But it was just a lot of fun growing up. Oberlin was a small town. During the school years, when you went to school, especially when you got up to high school, so there was always sports and things after. But during the summers, we all get together. One of the things I remember that every kid in town belonged to. We split ourselves up on one side of the track or the other side of the track, and we'd have rubber gun fights. And we'd make rubber guns, take an inner tube and cut little circles and stretch them across a gun that we'd cut out. And it'd start on Monday mornings, and if you got shot Monday morning, you couldn't play the rest of the week. Every Sunday it started back over again. But, I remember as a kid during the summer, I'd leave home in the mornings, and I probably didn't get back home till the sun was going down. But we found things to do, go out in the woods and trap squirrels, pick muscadines, swim in the creeks that were all the way. There was Calcasieu River was a big river. People came from all over. They had the biggest sandbar I've ever seen on it. But we always found something to do.
Yeah, so y'all during the summer, y'all spent like most kids up until these last years. Man, you were out on bikes, you were running, you were coming back.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. So a pretty happy, contented family. And you didn't have everything. Your family y'all had food, you had shelter, you had love. I mean, really?
We had food on the table, we had clothes to wear, had a roof over our head. But, up until I was probably a senior or so in high school, there were only 2 people in Oberlin that had a car. Nobody really had much of anything, but, 29 was a big depression. Everybody was working their way back out of that, but I never realized I didn't have anything. I had everything that I needed.
Especially with 5 siblings who were
Yeah.
your immediate play friends and all that, correct? Yeah, that's cool. You told me your grandparents name. Get into your parents and what they were like.
My dad was always a serious guy, but he was probably the most generous guy that I ever knew, because like I tell you, it was after the Depression. A lot of people didn't have anything on things. And I think half the stuff that went out of the store, he gave to families that needed it and all. And my mom was just a kind-hearted, the best cook I've ever known, the best pastry maker that I've ever known. And she was always doing something for someone else and all. In fact, I think that about 90% of the people in town when they had a birthday or something, they'd come get my mom to make a cake for whoever the birthday was. She was just that good. But all the memories I have on being a kid are just really great. My brothers, my sisters, my friends, my relatives. I can't think of one person in that town that I didn't get along with or didn't like. Not just get along with, that I really didn't like.
Yeah, we were talking about your mom. You having everything when you were growing up, Norman. You felt like and I know the kids these days, they get the PlayStation or whatever, and they think, but they have no idea how. In our generation, we had it pretty good too, but y'all had it even better, correct?
Oh, we had a lot of kids that got along together. We'd make games up or doing things. We'd take you'd find an old tree limb in a can, and you'd dig holes around a circle for how many you had and play a game called 10-man chinny. And we just sat there and play for hours. We played marbles. I don't remember the name of the game, but we'd play with knives where you draw a circle and you throw your knife in and you draw a straight line and see who could gain the most territory in the circles. But we always had something to do. And it was, I don't ever remember being bored. I could walk 100 yards from my house and go quail hunting. I could walk a mile from my house and go fishing. But there was always something to do.
You were about 6 years old when Pearl Harbor happened. Do you recall, rationing of food like your dad's store? Like talk about what you knew about war, and you were young.
Well, I was about 6 years old when the war started, and some of the things that I remember that you couldn't buy sugar, you couldn't buy anything with rubber in it. In fact, even coins, we used that you could get so many tokens to buy stuff at the store. You couldn't use money. You almost had to use tokens to do it. And I remember at school there was a drive for old metal to help the war effort. And I remember after school, we all take our little rider wagons and we'd go around and just look and pick up scraps and things. And we'd have a pile of 20 feet high and 40 foot long on what kids had picked up, and they come ship it off, and they used it in the war effort and everything. I remember every Friday night there was a service at church, praying for the people that were fighting and everything else. But it was everybody, even little kids, their mindset was, what can we do to help the effort? It was just and I remember when the end came. I remember the church bells ringing, the little siren going off in town, and because about everybody in town had someone in their family that was overseas fighting that war. But it was just it was a feeling I've never had before or since. I'm thinking about, you realize what people really did to make our country what it was.
Yeah, no, a lot can be said for that. It really gelled and got the country gelled. Even kids doing their effort to help build stuff was.
And when I was just a kid, it was I guess I was 6, 7 years old, right before the big invasion of Europe. And preparing for that invasion, they did it all around Fort Polk, Louisiana. And so the troops came all around. There was 100 yards from my house was a big open space, and there were all kind of troops just camped out in there. And one of the interesting things, my dad was mayor of the town, and he wasn't general then, he was a colonel. Colonel Ike Eisenhower was heading that whole training session, and I'll never forget, he came over to our house for dinner one day. He and a bunch of generals and all. And he later got promoted to general and then led the whole Normandy invasion. But they trained for that right out of Oberlin.
Yeah. No, everything. Hotel Bentley was the main in Alexandria. It was one of the places where they did all the D-Day, schematics, and but everything north of Allen, and then from Fort Polk.
Fort Polk was in Leesville, which was about 50 miles away, and of course, back then it was all wooded areas, but they had some rivers that they could do river crossings and things like that with. But
so Ike Eisenhower had dinner with the Deumite.
Yes, he did.
Bennett was talking about the church. How important was that church? I know we were talking about not just worship, but also all the activity.
Well, everything there weren't any buildings big enough in town to do anything else other than churches. So when they had socials, they were always in the churches. I remember when I was 6 years old, I became an altar boy, and back then the mass was said in Latin. So I was answering all the prayers. I wasn't really sure what I was saying, but I did. I was an altar boy from then, and I stayed as an altar boy till I graduated from high school. Being an altar boy was a lot of fun then because our priest was from Switzerland. His name was Father Judd, and he was just a great guy. And I was thinking back then on difference now. The church and the parish hall occupied a good piece of property. And besides being the pastor, he was also the maintenance man. I mean, on Saturday mornings and stuff, you'd see him out there mowing the yards and cleaning up and doing everything else. But what he'd do about once a month is he'd take all the altar boys on a little trip somewhere. And let me tell you what, going 15 miles to Oakdale to get an ice cream cone was a big deal back then, because it was summers he'd take you to little lakes out around there on swimming and barbecues and all. So once you got to be an altar boy, you wanted to stay. And we had about 12 of us, and on Sunday Mass we serve at Sunday Mass. All 12 of us, you look on the altar, and all you see is a bunch of little kids sitting up through there.
Way to get some good food too. You eat good.
When I was an altar boy, the priest in Oberlin had 5 churches that he said Mass at every Sunday. So about once a month, I was his altar boy, and I'd get up early. We'd have 6 o'clock Mass in Oberlin. Then we'd drive to Swallow and have Mass at Swallow, which was about 10 miles. And then we'd come back and have Mass at Guy, which was about 15 miles from Swallow. And then we'd drive up to Oakdale, which was another 10 miles, and have Mass. And then we'd drive to Elizabeth and have Mass. So I'd leave at dark, and I'd get home at dark and serve 5 Masses on a Sunday.
That was every Sunday? No.
He did it every Sunday. But as an altar boy, I only did it about once a month. We'd say early Mass at Oberlin, and by the time we got to Swallow, all those people would bring breakfast. And good sausage and boudin and all kind of egg casseroles and stuff. So I ate better that day than any day, because every place we went, they'd bring something. They knew we were traveling, they'd bring something to eat. So I didn't mind that at all.
That's true. Church and food go hand in hand, man. Yeah. And talk about the Lebanese cuisine. Did your mom have a lot of rest? And when did you start folding in the dirty rice and boudin?
Well, my mom growing up cooked all the French foods. And when she and my dad got married, my dad's first cook, Mr. Karam was my dad's first cousin on his dad's side. Miss Karam was his first cousin on his mom's side. When my dad and Miss Karam grew up, they grew up as brothers and sisters. Her mother died at childbirth, and they were only a few weeks apart. They nursed at the same breast. They didn't know until they were 10 or 12 years old that they were not brother and sister, that they were first cousins. So my mom learned how to cook Lebanese food from Miss Karam. And at the end, my mom cooked better Lebanese food than most Lebanese did.
How do you spell Karam?
Karam.
And that last name is a.
It's Lebanese. You know, they talk about Lebanon and Syria. It was all Syria at one time. It wasn't until after the Second World War, I think, that Lebanon split away from the Nasser regime, which is kind of funny because now the Nasser regime is finally gone. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, I saw that last week. That happened 2 weeks ago. What? Man, I was just getting ready to ask you something else.
But the Lebanese dishes, I mean, kibbeh. You know what a kibbeh is, huh? Oh, the grape leaves are great. The majadra is great.
We love Lebanese ethnic food, man.
Yeah.
We both.
We go to either Al-Basha or to Sarab's about every couple of weeks just to get a fix.
Got to have you.
You know, my sister cooked Lebanese food really great too, but and Kay can cook it, but man, it's not something you whip up in a hurry. It takes a while to do it. I mean, take a little grape leaf and roll 300 of those and see how long it takes you to do. So most of the time we go get our fix. Not as good, but you learn to live with it.
Yeah, there you go, man. Nobody's having to labor over the kitchen counter all day. As far as you guys in y'all's neighborhood or in your little town, anything stand out? Was there any big, like?
Oberlin was just kind of just a sleepy little town that I wish more towns were like that now, where, racism was not a thing in my town. We, blacks and whites, we played ball together, we fished together, we did everything that we'd eat at their house, they'd eat at our house. I didn't know what racism was till I heard that word the first time somebody started talking about what it was, but it was just a whole different era. I don't remember one person getting shot by anybody else in our town. I know there was, fist fights happened a lot of times, but as soon as the fist fight was over, you go drink a Coke or a beer or something together. But it was just so different than now. No, I don't know what happened along the way. Well, I guess what happened along the way is what happened in our schools. Is that I was a mischievous little guy, but I didn't do a whole hell of a lot of things because I knew what my daddy would do to me if I did. And every daddy did the same. In fact, if I went over to somebody's house and with one of my friends and we did something wrong, his daddy whipped him and he whipped me too. And then he called my daddy and my daddy whipped me when I got home. But I think people just had a lot more respect for each other and had a lot more discipline on things.
Yeah, so your father, you said he was kind of a no-nonsense guy, but and he was a loving dad, but you cross him or you lied to him or you do something.
Yes. Yeah, he didn't put up with any of that. I think about my dad came here, he was 16 years old. He worked for my uncle. And when the First World War started, he joined the Army. And they sent him to France, and he was in the Battle of the Argonne. Came back and worked for my uncle again until he accumulated enough money to go into business. But he was probably one of the most patriotic guys that I ever knew. Man, he belonged to the VFW, the American Legion. And when he first came here, my uncle was an immigrant, and immigrants were all suspect on things then. People didn't quite trust them or anything else. And they were all pretty good businessmen, and they came into little towns and they opened businesses and got successful really quick, and they couldn't figure out how they were doing it. And they didn't really like them. And I remember my uncle built up a big business, and sometimes he was threatened about things. And part of what my dad did working for him was at night, he was kind of like the night watchman, because my uncle was very successful. He had a big general merchandise store, a furniture store, a lumber yard, had property all over the place. And going from where people had suspect, my daddy ended up being elected as mayor of the town and served as mayor of the town for 20 years.
What years was he mayor of the town?
I don't remember the years, but it was before it was before I got into high school and all the way through me being in high school.
That's pretty big, man, Norman, to have your dad in those formative years, troublemaking, mischievous years, to have your dad as a mayor. But he wasn't the kind of dad to get you out of trouble, would he?
No, no. You know, talking about schools, you know, when I was in school, paddlings were acceptable. In fact, the worst thing was to get paddled at school. It was, you knew they were going to call, well, they call your house and tell them that they paddled you. So when you got home, you had another one to expect on doing some things. But I don't know very many kids that got into very much trouble. Of course, when I was a kid, drugs weren't prevalent. The only drugs that I ever heard of when I was a kid, when you got sick, you went to the drugstore and they gave you something. I had no idea what marijuana was till I got to LSU. They talked about it, but
Those were good, clean years, man. There's no doubt about that.
I think the generation I grew up in was probably the best generation ever. When you think about it, the only mode of transportation really was, if you owned your own car, which very few did, was a train. And even the bus services only start coming in. I was probably 6, 7 years old before buses start running through them. And there was no airlines that were flying. That came in after I was probably in high school or so when they started for commercial airline flights and everything else. But it was just a whole different generation.
No doubt. I want to go back. Your uncle was World War II, right?
My dad was World War I. But, well, my dad joined the Army. As soon as he learned to speak English, he joined the Army. They sent him to France, and he served, I think he served about 3 years in France before he came back. My brother served in World War II. He was in the Navy. In fact, it's interesting. He served on a ship called the Kid, which is he served on the sister ship to is it the Kid down in the harbor? Mm-hmm. Or he served on the sister ship with that one.
Your dad was he was in those trenches, or he was in between?
My dad? Yeah, he was an infantryman. He was in the trenches. In fact, back then they used gas. He got gassed in there, and it affected him for the rest of his life. I mean, he always had a cough that he could never get rid of.
Let me ask you this. We talked about it earlier. People like your dad, they didn't talk a lot about that war. Did it ever come up, or were you interested to hear? But
yeah, but they didn't. They did not. I went to France after, and I went to the Argonne Forest, the Battle of the Bulge, and all. And when you look at some of the monuments that are there now, there's one building that must be 100 yards long, and it's glass on the side, and all there are in there are just pieces of bones, fragments of bones of people that got killed. And when you go through the countryside, it looks like a big golf ball where all the divots were. They didn't have the big guns they had then that did. And I mean, look at the movie Saving Private Ryan. It was gory. They didn't want to talk about it when there was no PSD or PM, whatever it is now, that they had then. They just came back and they just learned to live with it.
Stiff upper lip, head up, and do your work, do your job.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he saw some pretty horrible things, friends and others.
Yeah.
And to be born in Lebanon and fighting for America, I mean, I'm sure he wanted to make an impression and fight for this country he loved.
Yeah. Well, back then, all those guys came here, all they were looking for was an opportunity. They just knew things. What made my dad leave Lebanon was the Muslims were really taking over Lebanon and Syria and those places through there. And of course he was Christian, and it was an escape for him to get, and since he had relatives here. It was always strange. The only other person that came here, my dad's brother came here. He lived in Eunice, but he had another brother that lived in Lebanon, and they never came, and he never went back. I always asked him, "You going to go?" Nope. He never had the desire to go back to Lebanon.
What was that uncle's name that had the successful businesses and all that? His brother.
His brother was Mac Deumite, but his first cousin his name was Habib Karam.
So your dad was Christian, and you've been a man of faith your whole life. That started at, get into, y'all would go to church. I mean, tell me about your religious and faith upbringing.
Well, my daddy was a religious man, and my mom was even more religious. But my mom said 3 to 5 rosaries every day of her life when she got to be older. And, holy days and Sundays, they wasn't any doubt whether you were going to Mass or not, you were going. Faith was a big part of everybody's life back then. Oberlin was a small town, 1,200 people. But think about it. They had a Catholic church, they had a Methodist church, they had a Presbyterian church, they had a Pentecostal church. I visited most of the churches. I knew most people. Hell, everybody in Oberlin knew everybody, But I don't remember any animosity among anybody on things, not even religion or anything else. They practiced the way they wanted, and we did the way we thought was right, and everybody just got along. Religion, and not even, politics, the only time people got to accept was politics, but that was only for about a month. Well, about a month before, once the election was over, everybody was back doing the same thing again. Everybody was friends and all.
Yeah, was that Huey, Earl? I mean, who do you remember making a splash? Did your dad talk politics back then, or?
Oh, look, I remember Earl Lone real well. There was a guy in Oberlin who was on the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, and he was a close friend of Earl Lone's. And I was about 15 when Earl Lone was running for governor, and during the summer, that's where I drove Earl Lone and Ernest Clements around, politicking. I remember when they'd bring back they had those big amphibious deals that they used in the Second World War, and they made a stage out of them. So most political candidates back then had one of those big, and they drive up into town. It was funny because the week before they were coming, the car would come in town with 2 big old speakers on the end, and they drive up and downtown playing music and says, "Governor Earl Lone's going to be here Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and we're going to give away hams." And politics was fun back then. It wasn't anything like it is right now.
Get a sliced ham and a bottle of Haddock.
That's right.
You were good.
That's right.
But y'all were in the town centers. I mean, they stumped in the town center, didn't they?
Yeah.
But it was an event.
Oh, it was. Everybody in town showed up to here.
Yeah, on the back of trains and all that. So
Yeah.
you drove Earl Long around for a campaign for a while.
I did. I've been to the Pea Patch many a times.
He was a character, huh?
Oh man, was he ever?
And he might not align with your ideology today, huh, Norm?
No. I've always wondered where Louisiana would be if De Lesseps Morrison had beaten Earl Lone for the governor of Louisiana. Morrison would probably have been the best governor we ever had. Of course, he knew how to govern, but he wasn't near the politician that Earl had. But I've often wondered where we would be if a guy like him, who was just a straight guy who knew how to run government, had taken over Louisiana back in those times. Because think back in those times, that's when oil and gas were really stuck. And if we'd had someone with leadership up through then, God knows where we'd be.
It's always blew my mind that Huey loathed oil and gas so much, but that was the backbone of the state. I never got that. But I didn't understand this other guy. He was more conservative, was he? The guy that you said could have.
Morrison?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, when he was mayor of New Orleans, and when he was mayor of New Orleans, every Latin American country that flew into the United States flew into New Orleans. Now they fly into Miami and fly into Houston. I think there's only one that I know of that still does that. But he had opened the gateway to South America for Louisiana, especially New Orleans and all. But he would have been a great governor.
Your parents, were they pretty conservative?
Yeah. You know, we didn't have a car, so we didn't take too many vacations on things. Sometimes on Sundays, with my uncle, we'd drive to, places, Lake Charles or New Iberia or Lafayette or Alexander to visit relatives or so. And that was a big deal. Get up dark Sunday morning, get in the car and drive there, have dinner, and drive back home. But it was, I think they did more to keep up with their relatives than we do now. Some of them live across town. You haven't seen them in 6 months.
Not like you could pick up the phone and call them back there. So y'all did eventually, you didn't have a car growing up, but eventually your dad got one, is that right? What?
My dad had a car before I was born and decided it was too dangerous to drive. And the first car I remember in our family, my older brother bought a car when he got back out of the Navy. He worked in Oakdale, so he needed a car. He worked for a bank. And that was the first car I remember in my family.
That wasn't Uncle Ed, huh?
No, that was Lewis.
And how many cars were there even in Oberlin?
When I was growing up in Oberlin, there were 2 cars. Miss Fuselier had a car and Mr. Karam had a car, and that was it. Now, some of the business had some trucks, pickup trucks. When I was a kid, the stores along the street, behind the stores, had a hitching rack, and people would actually ride their horses or bring their buggies and wagons and park behind the store with buggy and wagons and horses to come to town. And they come up with, a lot of times they come up bartering stuff. They'd bring fruits and vegetables and trade them for stuff that they needed at the store. Bartering was still a pretty big thing back in those days. Most of the people that would come in town would live within about an 8 or 10 mile radius. And they'd ride their horse or their buggy and wagon and come into town, spend the day visiting and shopping and go. Thinking about how different things were then, I remember people selling farms and on a handshake at a little cafe. A guy had a piece. Yeah, I'll please. Okay, to shake hands. There were no lawyers. Oberlin didn't have a doctor, didn't have a dentist, and didn't have a lawyer in town.
How'd you stay healthy? What happened when you got, sick?
Well, everybody, your grandmother had a remedy for everything. And if you got really sick, then you'd have to drive to Kinder or Oakdale to visit a real doctor. When I was a kid, the most important medicine to have in your house was Vicks Salve. Man, you got a cold, man, your mama rubbed you down with Vicks Salve and put some under your nose, and a couple of days later, you felt better.
A lot of the grandmas later on, where they mix honey and a little shot of...
Honey and a little shot of whiskey would help you cough and do it too.
Your parents had booze in the house, or were you...
My mom never drank anything, but when my dad came home every day, he'd take a big glass and put about a half inch of either Jim Crow or Early Times and fill it up with water, and he'd drink that as he ate his supper, and that was it. But I never saw my dad drink a beer, anything. They drank whiskey. And my dad and my uncle, every night, would get together either at his house or my house and play dominoes. And they'd play they'd come in and Mom fix supper for them. They'd eat and play dominoes, and about 8 o'clock they'd leave, go home, go to bed.
Yeah, man, yeah, So interesting. Lebanese, hardworking. The culture of Lebanese people were hardworking, upstanding citizens. And I mean, you hate to stereotype everything, but it seemed like they were that type of people.
You know, they were all so proud to be an Americans. They didn't consider them as Lebanese Americans, or though they were Americans. When they got here, they were so happy to be here and have the opportunities that they had because they knew what it was like where they came from. And, I don't remember a lot of welfare when I was a kid. Families helped families, and even families helped other people who didn't have any family to do things. But to them, to accept welfare, that was shame for them. They weren't about to do that as long as they could work.
Yeah. So when you watch the news today and you've seen your whole life just this turmoil in the middle, what do you think, Norman, about your ancestors?
I always had the feeling that Washington was a little bit corrupt, that most governments are. But until Donald Trump, I never realized how deep that swamp really was. And when you start learning the things that they do, it blows your mind. If you've ever read the book Jerusalem to Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, I think is the name of it. But that country went through a lot of things because when the days of oil, when we're coming up and that Middle East was really getting rich, Beirut was becoming the financial capital of the world. Think about it, because all those, they would rather deal in their own country than send their money to Switzerland or something. Then all of a sudden, when it starts happening, we have big revolutions and all this stuff breaks out and all. But it's just a shame what's going on. I'm glad my dad didn't have to live through that, because it would have driven him crazy to think about. I mean, he talked about when he was a kid, walking in the countryside, picking up pomegranates and figs and olives off trees and things like that. Well, I don't think that too much of that happens anymore.
So you went to Oberlin High School?
Oberlin High School. When I started Oberlin High School, there were only 11 grades. They didn't have a 12th grade. My senior year, they added the 12th grade, so I had to spend another year in high school.
Did you object?
Not really. Hell, I was only 16 years old when I started my senior year, so it wasn't. And of course, I love playing sports, and it just gave me another year to be with all my friends and play another year of sports.
Dominate those freshmen. What about little, think about small towns, as everybody knows everybody's business. You have any little squeeze back then? You started in high school, a few girls at the school started having little courtships or something?
I never really, I kind of liked them all. Never really had a steady girlfriend in high school. In fact, it was kind of funny because most of the guys in Oberlin would date girls in Kinder or Oakdale, and the guys in Oakdale and Kinder would come date girls in Oberlin. I can remember so many times during the summer, my friend and I, we had a couple of girls we liked in Kinder and a couple we liked in Oakdale, but nobody had a car, so we'd walk down to the highway and we'd hitchhike. And if a car was going to Oakdale, we'd hitchhike that way. If it was going to Kinder, we'd hitchhike that way. So whichever way we got, didn't really make any difference.
It helped to have a girl from East or West.
It made it a lot easier.
Yeah, man, wherever they were, I'd hitchhike that way. Man,
but a few times you get caught that couldn't get a ride home, so we'd walk 10 or 15 miles.
In the heat?
At night, in the middle of the night. You could walk down the middle of the road too. There's no cars coming.
Yeah, no, y'all didn't have dating apps. You, what made you prompt to go to LSU? Any of your siblings went to college?
I can remember, I guess I must have been about 6 or 7 years old, and I started listening to LSU football games. And I just loved LSU football games. And when I graduated from high school, I didn't get an offer from LSU. I got one from Mississippi State and A&M and Lamar Tech and McNeese and ULL, but I just wanted to go to LSU. So I came in and walked on at LSU.
On the football team?
Yeah.
A lineman?
Well, I came here as a fullback and ended up as a guard. And I'm thinking now, here I am, I'm a guard at LSU. I'm 5'10", I weigh 185 pounds. And right now, unless you're about 6'4" and about 360, you can't play guard at LSU.
Yeah. You were about half the size.
I was at least half the size of those guys. I remember the two running backs we had, Charlie Oakley and Charlie Brancato. I bet both of them didn't weigh 155, 160 pounds.
Who was the coach back then for LSU?
Gaynell Tinsley.
I've heard that name.
And who were the big players then?
When I started in '53, Tinsley was a coach, and the quarterback was Norman Hodgins. He was a pretty good player. LSU really wasn't that great a football team back then, but in about a year or so, Tinsley had retired, and they hired Paul Dietzel. So when Paul Dietzel came in, then you had Billy Cannon and Warren Rabb and Johnny Rogers and Robinson, rather. But it went from overnight being not so good to being a national championship. Of course, now I graduated before the national championship teams, but
you helped lay that foundation, that groundwork. How many years did you play?
well, I'm be honest with you. I was on the team for 3 years. I can't say that I played.
That's fair.
When I served on the Tiger Athletic Foundation board for 12 years, and it looked like every game we were giving an award to somebody for something. And I was out there one day, and I was telling Donnie Bone next to him, I says, you know, Donnie, I was on the LSU football team, but I've been on the field more with TAF than I was then.
You saw more of the turf.
I saw more of the field then than I did when I was on the team.
That's funny, man. That's funny. When did you segue? Or were you already gearing toward construction or engineering? As far as LSU?
When I came to LSU, I really started off in petroleum engineering because everything then they were drilling wells and everything around all was going big. But after my first or second year here, that petroleum engineers were having a hard time getting a job. And so I switched over to mechanical. And so I graduated in mechanical engineering. And it was funny, 'cause I got out of LSU. The summer before I graduated, they came in and did all the interviews. And everybody in engineering got an offer from some company, Exxon or Mobil or Texaco or something like that. And in between that time and graduation, a recession hit and nobody had any offers. So my first job as a mechanical engineer, I worked as a Boilermaker helper at Lake Charles at City Service Refinery. And I did that for about 6 months. And I had a good friend, his name was Sam Friedman. His daddy was a senator that I got to know very well, and he asked Sam, he said, about what I was doing, and Sam told him, he said, well, they hiring engineers at the Department of Highways. And so I sent in an application, and they hired me. So my first engineering job was working for the Louisiana Department of Highways.
Damn, interesting. When you say senator, state senator or U.S. senator?
He was a state senator.
Yeah, state senator. I got you. Interesting. And so what'd you do for it wasn't DOTD back then, but it was like you said.
It was Department of Highways.
And what'd you do?
Just Department of Highways, yeah. I worked in the project control section. We took all the drawings and specs for the highways. We wrote up the specs and then prepared bid packages so that contractors could come in and bid on the projects.
How long were you there?
I stayed there about 4 years, And then DuPont was building a plant in Reserve. And so I put in an application then and got a job there. So that was my first job is really doing my engineering.
The universities weren't quite so liberal and progressive back then, were they? I mean, y'all didn't have a lot of that type of ideology back then, right?
Didn't have any of those kind of things. There was no free speech alley. You could talk as freely anywhere you wanted to in the classroom or anywhere. I don't remember any professor indoctrinating me in any political way at LSU. That wasn't something that now we don't have. I think a college education today is one of the most overrated things that there are. And I even look back from then. You know, my degree is in mechanical engineering, and I did that for a while and helped me. But I'm in construction now. There's not a lot I learned at LSU. I learned most of what I know to do was on the job doing it. And I've done that since I was a little boy watching my grandfather drive nails. I think our educational system needs to be overhauled from what it is right now.
I remember you telling a story one time about one of your professors asking your opinion about X, Y, Z, and it might have been in construction.
No.
Yeah, but anyway.
We had to write a paper. He says, "What is your opinion of something?" And I wrote it down and I handed it in to him. And when I got my paper back, he gave me a C. And I waited after class and I said, "I need to talk to you." And he says, "What do you want to talk about?" And I said, "You gave me a C on this paper." And he says, "Well, I didn't think that you expressed what really was happening." I said, "That wasn't what the question was. The question was, what is your opinion? That is my opinion, so it's got to be an A. It's my opinion. You asked me what it was, and this is it." And he thought for a minute, he says, "You're right." And he gave me an A on it. But I'm not sure you could talk to a professor anymore after class.
Some people would say, Norman, that you have opinions, that you have a lot of opinions. And
I have an opinion on just about everything. May be right, it may be wrong, but I have an opinion. I'm probably the most vocal in my family. My oldest brother, Ed, he just flowed with the tide. He didn't, he just made it work, whatever it is. Lewis was very calm. My sister was really calm, but I always seem to have an opinion. And most of the time, I'm not bashful in expressing what it is.
No, you are not, man. No, you're not. Oh, shoot, man. But that's what makes Norman, man. Right. That's, yeah. Talk about Uncle Ed, man. That was your older brother?
Ed was the oldest one. I tell you, Ed was a great athlete. The problem that Ed had was when he was 15 years old, he had epilepsy. And back then, epilepsy was kind of frowned at, like something was wrong or you did something wrong or anything else. And, you know, when he'd get those seizures and things, people would make fun of him and do everything else. In fact, when he got up into high school, he decided, I'm not putting up with that anymore, and he dropped out of high school. But we dropped out, and they were going to the district track meet. And so the coach came by the house and pled with Edward to go to meet with him. Well, Ed goes to the meet and he wins the 100-yard dash and the shot put in the meet and all. And that was his last really stuff. But I remember when Ed was just a real young guy. He worked for my uncle who had all these businesses and everything going and loading lumber or load gravel. Gravel would come in Oberlin or sand or gravel mostly would come in on boxcars, and he and one of my uncle's sons would get in that boxcar with shovels and unload a whole boxcar of gravels in about 2 days. That's how I'm going to. I remember we had a lot of rice farms around there, and at that time they put the rice was put in 100-pound grass sacks, and they had time on the ears where you pick them up. And when it come time to load them on trains to ship them off, we'd all go there, and you get paid by how many sacks you put in. And I'd go there, and I was about 16, and he was probably about 30, but I could pick up one of those sacks at a time and grab it. Most everybody else did. Ed go pick up one, put one on one shoulder and one on. He was a horse. I'm telling you what. He was just a strong man.
Well, hell, you're not weak. You were probably pretty strong back then too, huh?
I was a pretty strong kid when I was. But Ed lived to be 100 years and 18 days. He always told me, I'm going to live to be 100. And 100 years and 18 days. And at his 100th birthday, he was still sharp as a dadgum tack. All the brothers and sisters and nephews and all, we had a little party for him out on Scott's patio. And he was just as sharp as he could be on things.
Yeah. Them Deumites, y'all got this, y'all got that gene on you that, I mean, for 90, you look great and sound great. I mean, y'all got something in you.
See, my second brother, Lewis, died when he was 97. And my sister was 95.
And how old did your parents live to?
My dad died when he was 78. He had a heart attack, and my mom died at 88.
78 and 88, yeah.
So it's your mom's genetics really are
Yeah.
probably stronger.
Yeah, because Mom had uncles that were over 100 years old.
Some people say you're just hitting your stride right now, Norman.
I was born, the life expectancy of a male was 52. So I've had a lot of land yet in my time.
You sure have. So time at LSU, studying, trying to get a job afterwards. Did you go back to Oberlin on a train or bus every once in a while?
Hitchhike.
Shit, hitchhike. What?
I'd say 90% of the kids who went back and forth from school hitchhiked. And it's funny because back then, you weren't afraid of the hitchhiker was afraid of you, you know. But yeah, many weekends I'd get out on the highway and hitchhike.
Norm, if you had to guess, how many strange cars or strange people in cars would you say you hopped in over your life hitchhiking?
Oh, 100, yeah, probably 100 times. Well, if you count all those from Oakdale to Oberlin, yeah, probably 100, 150, maybe 200 times.
So you'd go home for a while, yeah, I got you. And finished in what year was that you graduated?
1958.
The year they won the national championship?
Yeah.
The next year they won.
They won it that year, yeah.
Yeah. And so get back to Allied, was it? Where was that again? DuPont, I'm sorry, where you went working after DOTD?
I went to work for DuPont. I loved working for DuPont. They were the first company that I ever worked for that was really safety oriented. I mean, they didn't ask you to do anything that would deal, but the product they made wasn't that safe. And when that job was finishing up, they were going to send me to Chambers, New Jersey. So they sent me down to look around for a place. And when I went to Chambers, I knew I wasn't ever going to live in Chambers. And so I got a job with Borden Chemical and down at Geismar. And I worked for them for about 4 or 5 years. And we had a little explosion in a coal box in one of our plants. And it required some special type insulation and stuff that nobody in here did. And I finally found a guy in Houston that could do it. And he shows up one day and he's got a pickup truck and 2 laborers and a cement mixer in his pickup truck. And so I meet him at the gate and take him and show him what he's going to do. And 3 days later, he left. I got him a check for $35,000, which is about 3-4 times what I was making in a year. And I says, I'm on the wrong side of this equation. And so I figured, I got to get in this business. Well, I left Borden and went to Wyandotte and worked for them for a couple of years, and they went on strike. And while they were on strike, I was out there 18, 24 hours a day a lot of times, but they paid me twice. So I came home and told Kay, if this goes on for 6 months, I'm going into business for myself. Well, it lasted 8 months, and when it was over, I'd taken that extra money, and I knew I could live 8 months. And if I didn't make it 8 months, I knew I could find a job that like I had. And so I left there, started my own little business, and was very fortunate. I went to Georgia Pacific was just building their first plant. And I went out there, and I don't know how it happened, but I got in to see the plant manager. His name was Charlie Mackey, who ended up being one of my best friends. And we talked for about an hour about everything you could think of except work. And he finally says, what are you here for? And I says, well, I'm just starting my own little construction company. And I said, I know when you build new plants, there are a lot of small jobs that big contractors don't want to do, and I want to do those for you. And he said, well, I'm going to make you a deal. He says, my plant engineer just left. He says, come to work for me. And I said, I just left that job. I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll come to work for you as your plant engineer till the plant's been up and running for 6 months, and then you give me the contract to do all these other jobs. He says, you got a deal. And that's where I started from.
What year was that?
1969.
1969, you started, how old were you, Norman?
I was
About 34.
34.
So you, I'm gonna go back to LSU for a second. Is that where you and Kay, were you dating? Tell me about your personal life. Fraternities, what did you do socially back then?
You know, I dated a lot of folks, nobody really serious on things. At LSU, I met one of Kay's good friends, girl from Shreveport, and we really became good friends. We weren't romantically deal, but you know, if she needed somebody to go somewhere with, she called me. If I needed somebody, I called her. And I had a good friend from Mississippi, Bill Adams, who was a young guy, but he was a pilot, and he lived in Crosby, Mississippi. And he worked for Mr. Crosby. And Mr. Crosby had a little airplane, a little 4-seater airplane that Bill flew for him. And one weekend, Mr. Crosby told Bill, look, why don't you take the plane and you and a friend go have some fun? And so he called me and he said, let's do something this weekend. I got Mr. Crosby's plane. So I called Carolyn and I said, look, Bill and I are going to come up to Shreveport, fix him up with somebody. And so we fly up to Shreveport, and all the way up to Shreveport, Bill's talking about how beautiful Carolyn was, and she was. And so when we got there, I says, Carolyn, this guy is driving me crazy. You go out with him, I'll take the other girl. And it turned out to be Kay. And so we kind of hit it off. And
You talked about meeting Kay, so you flew up there, you pawned off your buddy on this, you know, he's been dying to meet Carol, whatever, and now, and here she is when you first met her right there, right? Y'all had dinner or something once y'all landed up there, or what?
yeah, we landed up there. They picked us up at the airport. We went out to dinner that night, went across to Bossier City, danced half the night. And the next day we just drove around looking at Shreveport, took them for a flight, you know. I think Kay thought she might have hit a jackpot or something. She didn't realize it wasn't my plane. But
Did you tell your buddy, let me pretend it's mine?
I started to think if I'd known a little more of that, I'd put a sign on there that says Deumite aircraft or something.
Put some stickers on the side of it, yeah. Well, hell, maybe you didn't have to. When did y'all start when did the butterflies happen? That night dancing?
Well, you know, Kay was a beautiful girl. My God, well, she could dance like crazy and just sweet, had a great personality. It perked my interest in a hurry. And I think about 8 months later, we were married.
Is that right? 8 months?
Well, hey, I wasn't no teenager. I knew a little bit about what I was looking for and what I wanted to do. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah, so you were 25, man. I mean, at 25, men are, you know, I mean, especially back then, right? So what were you looking for in a spouse when you were younger? What did you like? Personality, dance, looks? What?
Yeah, everything. I was looking for the whole package.
Did Kay deliver?
She did. She did. She's been a great wife. Put up with me for 64 years. She's been a great wife.
Little did you know that encounter back in when you were 25 would here you are at 90, and
But you know, back then when you married somebody, you thought that you'd be with them forever, you know.
It was a commitment. It
what?
was a
I'm sorry, say that
commitment.
word again.
You know, there's some rocky times in every marriage that I believe. I don't know if I've only been in one, but I can tell by my friends. But you know, a commitment doesn't say till things get rocky or something else.
You and Kate dated for 8 months, and then at some point during that 8 months, you started thinking about marriage, probably, huh, Norm?
Yep, I did. Well, I don't need a lot of time to make a good decision.
You knew it was a good decision. And
Well,
so what?
Looking at Kay, her interactions with her family, her friends, even my friends and all, I knew she was special.
She come from good stock too?
Yep. Kay's daddy was a dentist, and maybe the best dentist I've ever had. After I went to him and I came back to Baton Rouge, I didn't have a dentist that I went to all the time, but I had a problem. I'd go, and every dentist that I went to after that, when they'd look in my mouth, they called their staff and said, "Hey, come look at this." He put in a little gold cap tooth or inlay or something. I mean, evidently, it must have been pretty good because it impressed every dentist that saw it.
And so was Kay at LSU at that time? Or
No, Kay went to Northwestern.
She did. Natchitoches?
Natchitoches.
I didn't know that. I didn't know she was a demon or whatever. Yeah, yeah. What was her background in?
Well, Kay went to Northwestern for 2 years and decided she didn't want to go to college, so she dropped out and she was working for Corby's in Bocan, an insurance company in Shreveport.
So you guys started dating. I mean, she was up in North Louisiana, you were south. So what was it, telephones, or how'd y'all communicate?
Well, we talk on the phone, but on weekends, either I'd take the train up there or she'd take the train down to Baton Rouge. And I think that probably shortened the whole thing alive because both of us got tired of traveling.
That's a pretty long train ride to see
It
the
is a
Sweden,
long
huh?
train ride.
Shoot, man, yeah. And then when you got up
You
there,
know,
where'd
one of those train rides up there, though, is where I met Pat Screen and his whole family. They were going up to play somebody up, Bird, I think, for the state championship.
What? I mean, that was 6 hours on the train. How long? I mean, y'all made multiple stops.
It was. They only made about 1 or 2 stops, but it was 5 or 6 hour trip. Yeah,
And where'd you stay when you got up there?
I stayed at her house.
The parents were cool with you? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so y'all dated for 8 months, and then all of a sudden, what was the big proposal? What finally made you ask her?
It was on Christmas Day, and I just figured, you know, this spending every weekend on the road's got to end, and why not end it now?
And her parents were receptive?
They were pretty nice folks. They kind of liked me.
So you probably had to talk to them beforehand. You know, did all the traditional.
Oh, let me tell you what, Kay's mother liked to get under my skin when she could, because we'd go there and we'd watch an LSU football game, and she'd pull for the other team, you know. But I knew it was a friendly deal, but we had a good time picking at each other.
That's where Kay gets her personality from, her mom, huh?
Yeah, her mom. I tell you what, Kay had a bunch of uncles and aunts that were all had big, strong personalities too.
What year was that when you proposed?
60.
And she was okay with moving down south after that, huh?
Oh yeah. She liked Baton Rouge.
Yeah. What was Baton Rouge like back in the early '60s?
Well, you know, it was way smaller than what it was now. You know, everything ended. The traffic circle out on Florida and the airline, there was nothing past that. LSU was 10,000 students or so. none of the Blue Bonnet wasn't out anything. Like I said, it was about 50,000 people. But LSU was a big attraction. And then the fact you could take an hour and be in New Orleans was also a pretty nice feature. There were a lot of jobs being created in Baton Rouge. I mean, that big refinery was growing, chemical plants were moving in, Geismar was growing like crazy. Across the river at Plaquemine and Dow was moved in and was getting really big and all. Man, when I worked for the Department of Highways, I was making $440 a month. And when I went to work for DuPont, they paid me $750. I thought I was going to be able to buy the world. I mean, $750? Are you kidding me? You know what I keep in my desk? My first income tax return. I'd been in the Army, the last 6 months in the Army and the first 6 months working for the Department of Highways and all. You know what my total income was? $3,200.
And you got a tax return?
I kept a copy of that tax return. And every time I think things was bad, I look at that tax return and say, oh man.
I didn't know you went in the Army. What years was that?
59 and 58, 59.
Korea was what?
Well, there wasn't any war. When I was at LSU, I went through ROTC.
Yeah, right. Like everybody
And
required
then I
to,
got
right?
my commission, and then I had to go in on active duty. I only served 6 months on active duty because there was no wars going on, and they had more officers than they needed. So at 6 months, I came home and served in the reserves for 10 years.
10 years?
Yep.
Every weekend you were doing something? I mean, every month? Once
Every
a
month.
Once
Every
a month?
month you had a weekend to go train. Yeah.
And where were you stationed for that 6 months?
Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I never forget when I was in the ROTC one summer. I went to summer camp at Fort Bliss, Texas. And I'm gonna tell you what, the tallest tree is about like that plant right there, and it was hot. And I was talking to this old sergeant, and I said, Sergeant, does it always get this hot in Fort Bliss? He said, well, Lieutenant, he says, let me tell you something. He says, if I had a home in hell and a ranch at Fort Bliss, I'd sell my ranch and go home.
Yeah, they always talked about West Texas. That's where Bear Bryant used to take his people out West Texas to train,
Ooh, man, and the guy said, well, the humidity's low. I said, yeah, there's no humidity in an oven either. That don't mean it ain't hot.
That's true, man. That is so dated her, and y'all got married in 1960, and then at, did you say 9 years later is when you started your own company?
Yep.
69? And then Steve was born. Tell me about did y'all talk about family and all that and having kids?
I can't say that any of our kids were planned. The church kind of plans it for you, huh? There's 3 weeks difference in Steve and Scott, and there's, a year and 3 weeks difference in Steve and Scott, and a year and a week difference in Scott and Stacy. And then Sloan was kind of a caboose.
Yeah. Sloan was bringing up, there was a little gap there. Y'all were busy with 3 of them.
Well, I always tell everybody we moved. The milkman didn't know where we were.
Took a while to find you, huh? Yeah. At 60, where were y'all living back then?
When we first got married, we lived in those apartments on Acadian Thruway right behind Catholic High. And then the first house we bought was a little house right off Drew Court, right off Essen Lane. It was a nice little house, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a single carport, and I paid a whopping $16,000 for that house. Now you see, things were me making that boom. I paid $16,000 for that house. we lived in that house for about 5 years. Then I bought a lot and built a house further down. I sold that $16,000 house for $30,000, and I built the other one for $30,000. And we lived there till 1979, and I sold that house for $120,000. So when we were young, you could buy a starter house, you could live in it for a few years, you could sell it enough, and if you built your own house, you could build a bigger house, and the equity in your house, you could always move up you don't do that anymore.
No, it's hard to do that. But you bring up a good point. Were you always pretty savvy and pretty good as far as business? You know, you got that from your dad, or?
Well, I always kid everybody and tell, my dad was from Syria and Lebanon. Syria was descendants of the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were really smart businessmen.
I mean, that seems like something you probably always had your whole life was like you said, a sense of the importance of the dollar, working hard, but also advancing. And if you're going to work, you're going to make money. Is that what you said?
Absolutely. When I first started my business, I think I had 6 people in my company starting. So besides being the superintendent on the job, I was also the timekeeper. I was also the check writer, the accountant, and back then it was a one-page deal, so I was also my tax man. So starting out where I did everything, and so I got a feel of what it was to do things, which helped me a lot along the lines because I knew what to expect from people that I hired and what, but. 6 people all turned into 16, and 16 turned into 32, and by the time I sold the company to Turner, I think I had about 600 people working.
All at Georgia Pacific, or?
All at Georgia Pacific.
That's how big a contract you have, maintenance and construction?
When I went out there, all I was doing was little small jobs. Big contractors don't like to do small jobs. They can't make anything off of them. And so we were doing those little small jobs, and then the scaffolding contractor really screwed up out there. And so they asked me if we could build scaffolding, and I told them, sure. And so we took over doing the scaffolding group, and then they were having problems getting anybody to come in and do railroad maintenance. And they asked us if we could do that. I'd never built a railroad in my life, but yeah, we did it. And we did that, and then the painting contractor got in the vine, so we started doing the painting. And after a while, we were doing everything on the plant. We were doing all the mechanical work, all the electrical work, all the instrumentation work, and all the stuff that went around it through there. Just somebody screw up, and we'd pick it up and move on from there.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't going to be stopped by not knowing how to do something. You're going to figure it out, huh?
Yeah. Well, somebody's doing it, so it can't be that hard. When I first went into business on my own, was the time that unions were starting not to have so much control over everything. And before that, see, if you hadn't been part of a union, you couldn't work at a plant. And then what happened was another union came in, and they were sort of an all-purpose union, and some of the plants were switching over into that one. And then, I was small when I went in, so unions weren't concerned about me. Nobody tried to unionize us or make any problems or anything. But during the course of things, unions start losing a lot of their clout. And so when I got to the whole plant maintenance, I wasn't union at all.
Georgia Pacific, that was paper. What were they doing up there?
Georgia Pacific started out as a paper company, and they were buying so much glue and stuff when they paper and timber, making plywood and stuff. So they decided to build a plant and make their own glues and stuff like that. That plant that started out as methanol and phenol, and then it grew with the caustic and chlorine PVC, and then they finally ended up. The Georgia Pacific finally ended up selling the plant.
To Georgia Gulf or what?
Georgia Gulf. Some of the people that worked for it bought it, and they formed it as Georgia Gulf. And since then, they sold it about 3 times, I think.
And you sold it, what year was that?
It was about 12, 15 years ago that I sold it to Turner.
Y'all were both working, the Turner had a contract out there too?
Turner was doing a lot of the construction work out there. And of course, Roland Toops and I had been friends for years, and they had tried to get that maintenance contract, but they never could get it. And
Why is that? Why couldn't they get it?
well, I was very fortunate. I told you the first trip I made out there, me and the guy, but he became one of my best friends. He was a plant manager. And then guys that came to work out there, a lot of them didn't have a whole hell of a lot of experience. And, I kind of worked with them a whole lot, kept them from getting in any problems. And when they moved up, the next plant manager was somebody who I'd helped get to be the plant manager. So it was kind of hard to go. Personal relationships. Personal relationships and the people you have working is a key. I don't care who you are. If you don't have good people and you don't have good relationships, because every new plant manager that goes into a plant, he wants his own people. He wants to know that maintenance guy is going to cover his back and all. So he doesn't mind making a change. But when they come up through the ranks like they did there, it makes a whole lot of difference. And a couple of things that made me think, maybe I need to talk to them. One of them was, when you get so big and all the new rules and OSHA and all, you got to start having a human relations department. You got to have a legal department and all this. And I got thinking, I'm not sure I want to go through all this stuff. And I knew they wanted the contract, and Bernhardt also wanted the contract, so I knew they didn't want Bernhardt to get it. And so we made a deal, which was good for both of us. And it just worked out really good. Sometimes you just get lucky. I'd rather be lucky than good. Good, you can't get it done. Lucky, it always gets it done.
Isn't there that adage about, it is luck, but you got to be in the position, right?
Well, yeah. Well, luck helps a lot, but you better prepare yourself to be in the position to take that luck when it comes to you.
Yeah, when it comes to the working world, Norman, a lot of people would say they hold you up in pretty high regard. Think you made pretty good decisions and did well for yourself, huh?
I did what I always told my kids to do. You always do your best. If you can't do any better than that. You give it your best, and I think people respect when you do your best, and they know it. And everybody makes a few mistakes along the way, but as long as everybody knows you're doing your best, what can you say? What can you say?
So we're going to go back to, y'all moving to Baton Rouge, but y'all started meeting people and mingling and getting your kids. Y'all had Stephen in, I'm going to guess, 1962, 61 or something? 61,
end of 61. Scott in 62, Stacy in 63, and Sloan in 69. Yeah. One of the things that we were able to do, like say, when I went to work and they doubled my pay, I thought, well, we could buy it. So we joined Bocage, and we met a lot of friends at Bocage that are still really close friends. And then when our kids started going to school, they went to Westminster. So lucky enough, we met a lot of friends there that are still our friends. And then being born of St. George, working the fair, we met a lot of really close friends that are still close friends.
And that's how you do it, man. It ain't about, going on Facebook. You get out in the community, you become social, you serve hot dogs, hamburgers, beer, you get involved, and that's where you meet. Bill,
it was funny. Your mom and dad and Kirby and Faye Guidry and the Revolts, we handled a hot dog stand for years at the St. George Parish Fair. And then they got wise, so they put the hot dog stand next to the beer stand. And then the beer was outstanding.
Y'all went from hot dogs to beer,
Oh, no, we didn't sell beer, but we bought them.
and that's probably when you made all your friends drinking that beer and giving hot dogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of lifelong relationships, huh, Norm?
Yeah. God, friends, and family, it don't get any. That's by far the most important things in your life that you'll ever do. You know, getting up where we are now, our real long-time friends are thinning out.
Yeah.
But I think now out of the 10 couples that, well, you remember the Christmas parties we always had? I think there are only 3 husbands left.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Man, y'all, you had some good ski trips back then. I mean, a bunch of
God.
Cajuns going to the mountain.
Let me tell you what. If you want to get close to your kids, you take them skiing every year because you have them captive. I mean, they stay in the same place with you. They're not out at night. They eat their meals and everything with you. And when you're doing it with friends, like, you know, our family all had somebody their age to ski with, you know. If you want to bond with your kids, there is no better family vacation than a ski trip.
You're absolutely right. You know what's funny is how much, I mean, you guys, you get in the mountains and how much Mardi Gras week, sometimes at Vail one year where there was a parade. Yeah. I mean, Dad would put on, y'all tore it up.
Oh, I tell you what, I have no regrets in life about we had so many good times with so many good friends. When I ever think about getting down a little bit, I just think about what I've had and what I've been through. How lucky can you get?
Yeah, so as at 90 years old, Norman, I mean, you know what's inevitable. I mean, you feel like your legacy will be a pretty positive one when it comes to your grandkids, kids. I mean, what do you hope they remember about Norman?
I just hope they say he was a good guy. That's about it. I've tried to be good and fair with everybody. I've tried to help wherever I could. No, like I say, I probably could have done some things better, but at the time I did the best I could, so I have no regrets. And look, how about living this last part of my life out? My son lives around the corner. My daughter lives down the street. My grandson lives across the street with 3 beautiful little great-grandchildren. I can't wait to get to heaven if it's going to be any better than this.
Yeah, no, you got a nice, right here is a pretty comfortable little spot with you and Kay and these great grandkids. That's a treat. Not a lot of grandkids want to be that close to it, but y'all have something special.
Look, they came over last night. They love to come over here because they can get a couple of chocolate kisses and they can watch probably more TV than they can at home.
And Kay, I mean, I know you grew up Catholic. Well, up in
Kay was Baptist. Okay. You know, when she would go to mass with me on Sunday, and we'd take the kids, and I guess we were going to Lady Mercy then, and she just decided, you know, if we're going to go to church as a family, we all need to be the same. And so I didn't even know anything about it, but she took instructions and got confirmed and became Catholic.
What did her family think of that?
They were all for it.
Really? A
Yeah.
Baptist family?
Yeah. Well, they knew that I was pretty strong Catholic, and that was probably the best thing for everybody, so it didn't bother them.
And so through it all, I mean, when you look back on it, Norman, I know there's some sad points, some real downs in your life, and I know you had to lean on your faith a lot more than you probably ever thought.
Well, you know, when I was just a little boy, there was a black guy that lived in town. Everybody called him Uncle Page. And I don't know how he did it, but he lived in a little tin shack that was about 4 feet by 8 feet. And to sit in the summer, he had to take his chair out and sit in the yard to do it. And I used to go over there and talk to him a while. And I'll never forget one time I was kind of down a little bit. I don't even remember what it was for. he was asking me, what was the matter? And I said, I don't want to talk about it and all. He says, and he called me Junior. Everybody, and then back, he says, Junior, he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, everybody got problems. And he said, if you could take your problems and throw them in a big old ring, and everybody else had to throw theirs in that big ring, and then you had to jump in that ring and get one problem, you fight like hell to get yours back. And he was right. Nobody gets out of this world unscathed. I mean, we've had, I don't think there's anything much worse than losing a son, but there's a lot of people that lost a son. In fact, God lost one, to be honest with you. But like you say, faith and friends will get you through a lot of things you never thought you'd get through.
Yeah. And I'm sure you and Kay really kind of, you talk about that really gelled y'all's relationship too. Y'all leaned on each other.
Well, after Steve's accidents, we made it a point every night we get with the kids and we talk about Steve. And, a lot of people would say Steve and says, oh, Norman, I'm so sorry. And I said, no, Steve was part of our lives. It's not like it never existed. And if we don't talk about it, it won't be there. It's always, I think of Steve every day. The last time I saw him, I was sitting down on this fireplace, and he and I were sitting down talking. He'd been to LSU just a few days and talked about what he was doing and all. But when you have one tragedy, I kind of sat back there for a while and said, man, this ain't ever going to happen again. But it did happen again in a different way. But it did happen. So you never know. It's a day at a time, and
Life is precious.
life keeps going. Life keeps going. I learned a lesson I learned when I worked for DuPont. I was out in the field. We were making a big concrete pour. And a guy came out there and he said, you hear the news? And I says, no. He says, they just killed President Kennedy. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And I couldn't leave then until we got through. When we got through the pour, I walked back to my office and I turned on the radio. And they were talking, and 2 hours had passed. And I always thought I thought that I was always the hardest working guy on the job and everything else. In 2 hours' time, they'd already sworn in a new president, and the country never skipped a beat. And it made me realize I just ain't that damn important.
We're talking about some of the adversities and challenges and just life events. But through all that and that pain, I'm sure people have leaned on you and Kay over the years for comfort and guidance for a lot of people. Would you say that that's accurate? That's accurate.
And we've tried to reach out to as many as we can that we know. I tell you who else is, not so much anymore that he's older, but when Sloan was younger, every time some kid got a spinal cord injury or something was in the hospitals, one of the therapists from the hospital would call and want Sloan to go visit with him. Because, when you walk up to Sloan, you say, I know how you feel. He knows you don't know how he feels. But when a guy comes up there in a wheelchair that can do it, and he says, I want you to know things are going to get better. I know how you feel. He knows. He knows.
And nobody knows other than people that have been through that situation. And as a longtime friend and someone who's known Sloan, Sloan also has been one in this community where a lot of people glean a lot of strength and just a lot of hope seeing Sloan,
One of the things that when Sloan, Sloan spent 9 weeks in a trauma center. He spent 9 weeks in intensive care. He spent 11 months in a rehab hospital. And when he was in the rehab hospital, the only thing Sloan could do with his left hand was he could scratch his nose a little bit, and that was about it. Kay, we rented an apartment in Jackson, and Kay just moved down there so she could be with him every day. And I would leave here on Thursday at noon and come back Sunday night. And one Thursday, I got tied up, and so I was a little late getting in, and Kay had gone to the apartment, so I dropped by the hospital to see Sloan. And he was laying in bed. I mean, And they'd taken all the patients that could get out of bed, they'd taken them to a movie to get them out. And the only ones were left with those like Sloan and those who had no idea where they were. And I walked in, I got off the floor, and I could hear all this hollering and screaming, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what the heck's going on? And it was all these kids who'd had serious brain injuries and all. And I walked in Sloan's room, and I walked in, and he was just kind of laying in bed, you know, looking up, and I said, hey buddy, how things going? He says, I've been sitting here thinking, Dad. He says, you know, I am lucky. I still have a good mind. And I knew from that point on he was going to make it. I didn't know how or what. But if you think things are bad, sometimes you just need to look around.
Sloan and Scott have been real helpful because I know Scott does a lot.
You know what? Everybody talks about heroes. I have my own personal hero. You know, Scott gave up his whole life so that Sloan could have a better life. I mean, you know, Scott's a good-looking guy. He's got a good, successful company and all going. He could be doing everything that anybody wants to do. But when Sloan first came home, Scott came over one day and he says, I want to talk to you a little bit. And he says, I know you can take Sloan now, but he says, I know one of the things on your mind is when you get older, what's going to happen? He says, don't ever worry about it. I got him. And you know, everybody sees Scott taking Sloan out now to have dinner and everything. Oh, what a great brother. They don't realize that every morning, that every day, every night, Scott comes here and puts Sloan to bed. Every weekend, he gets him up and dresses him on the weekends. I think Scott's been one place in the last 25 years without taking Sloan. I mean, he's taken him to Panama, he's taken him to Las Vegas, he's taken him to California, he's taken him down to the Florida Key. But let me tell you what, if there's a better brother around, I can't wait to meet him.
Yeah, no. You know, it's hard for me to hear that song, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, without thinking about Scott.
Yeah. Well, every time I hear that, it brings tears to my eyes.
I think the story was some guy, a brother was holding.
He was bringing his brother to Boys Town in Nebraska, and the priest, when he came in, says, "Here, let me help you." And he said, "Oh, he ain't heavy, Father. He's my brother."
And so Sloan, his mind has always been there, and he's maintained. And I know he gets down, but he's always maintained that attitude that he gets up in the morning and we're going to go at it again.
I tell you, he's handled it better than anybody that in my family could have ever handled it. He has his down times, but there are not a lot of them.
And I think what really makes between Steve, Scott, is just, man, the unwavering love that Stacy, you, Kay, it's just, man, and I know that's a lot derived from your faith and all, but just that love is that glue. I
think faith is a big part of it, and that love is a big part of it. But you know, it's you do what you have to do. The load gets heavy, but like I say, when you look at the overall picture, we could have lost Sloan 40 years ago and not had the enjoyment we've had about being around him and everything else. It could have easily been just like Steve. It could have ended in that one time.
You had 3 boys, and I know it was easy rearing boys. You throw, especially with that creek, you throw them a truck and some dirt. Stacy came, she was the third one. That was a little different for you, huh, Norman?
A little bit. I tell you what, Stacy is too much like her dad on things. Stacy has an opinion on everything, and she don't mind telling you that either.
What'd you think when she decided to name her firstborn Steve? How'd you hit?
I never forget, she was in Women's Hospital, and they brought the baby in, and she says his name is Steve. Well, gosh almighty. It almost felt like Steve was reborn.
So Junior, People still call you. I mean, Sonny and them call you.
Most people that have known me for a long time still call me Junior.
Your mom. I mean, Kay.
Yeah.
What was it like when y'all had 4 kids? Steve was born in '61. Him 60. Y'all had 4 kids under 9 years old, right? Y'all moved to Chelsea off of Essen. I mean Drusilla.
When we lived on Drew Court, we had 3 kids and all 3 of them in baby beds. Think about that. All 3 of them were in baby beds. That's how close together they were.
Did you change diapers?
Oh, I changed many of diapers. That was my deal every night. When I came, because I'd leave early, go to work in the morning, I'd come back late in the afternoon, so I didn't really get a chance to spend time with the kids. But every night, I would bathe them and dress them for bed. That was my deal.
Yeah, that was your time with them, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
My sister lived in Baton Rouge. She had a bunch of kids, and I would go babysit them all the time. So being around a bunch of kids and feeding them and getting ready for bed and all that wasn't anything that was strange to me. So when they came in, they were just mine. That was the only big difference. They were mine. And
I remember Scott telling me the story, but I know that in your time, you weren't afraid to discipline some boys, especially if they were acting up. And I know one time you came home and Scott said something that, get it over with, Dad. I forget what the story was, but go ahead.
I'm a firm believer in discipline, and I don't think anybody ever ought to beat a kid, but I think the reason God put that much flesh on your butt was so that your daddy could use it to make you realize you'd done something wrong. But when we moved to Drusilla, there was Ward's Creek ran behind the house, and it was a big old creek. And Scott spent half his time down in that creek. And even after it rained, and I'd get concerned, I told him, I says, the next time you down in that creek, I'm going to whip your butt. And so it went about 2 weeks, and a lot of little kids were still playing in the creek. And I come home from work, and I drive up the driveway, and Scott's just sitting down there waiting, and I get out of the truck, and he runs up and he says, Dad, he says, will you go ahead and whip me now because I want to go in the creek? He didn't mind the whipping. He just didn't want the anticipation of that whipping.
Did you oblige?
I obliged. And I remember when I guess Scott was about 12, Steve was about 13. We lived on Drusilla. I woke up one night and I thought I heard something. I listened, but I did. And I walked over in their room, and Scott and Steve were gone. So I walked over to the carport, and my pickup truck was gone. So I just sat around there waiting, and a couple hours later, I see the truck come down the street. The lights are out, and it's just creeping low, and I run out that front door. I said, what are you doing in my truck? And I opened the door, and Scott made like he was sleeping. He said, I don't know, Dad. I just woke up and I was here. I said, that dog ain't gonna hunt, son. And so I was going to be the dad that was just going to be patient and listening. So that next morning at breakfast, I sat down and I said, look, guys, it's awful dangerous for y'all to be driving a pickup truck. You don't know how to drive that well. It's night. Most have been out. They don't see things well. Some of them have been drinking. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're not going to do that, Dad. Well, I trusted them just a hair, but I set a little trap on their screen that if they went out, they'd know there was a little thread they broke. And so about a month later, I come in, I walk by the front door, and it's broke. So we're sitting down at the supper table. And I says, well, how was that midnight ride? And they looked at each other like, how in the hell did he know? And I says, I tried to be very calm and speak to y'all about how dangerous that was, but evidently I didn't get y'all's attention. But I says, y'all come back here to the bathroom because I'm fixing to get your attention before I tell you this again. I got their attention.
Did Stacy and Sloan ever receive any of that type of attention?
It was so funny because the night after that, we were sitting at the table eating dinner, and Scott said something. He said, "You know, me and Stephen get whippings all the time. You don't ever whip Sloan." And Sloan was only about 6 years old, so he said, "Well, I said, watch what y'all do, and I don't do it."
He ain't no dummy, was he?
Oh no.
Was it coincidence that y'all named him? Did y'all purposely?
You know, we were going to name Stephen Anthony Deumite. And a friend of Kay's came over and she told him, and she said, "Oh, you can't name him that. His initials are going to be SAD. So we named him Stephen Wayne. I don't know where Wayne came from, John Wayne probably. And I'd always liked the name Scott. So when Scott was born, we named him Scott. And then after we had the two S's, they said, Kay said, "I kind of like naming them S's." So we named the S.
Was Kay happy to see a little girl come?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She thought it was high time to have another woman in the house.
She thought it was.
Yeah.
She didn't know it was going to be somebody who was going to tell her what to do.
No, yeah, Stacy's like her dad, huh?
Oh, Lord.
She ran a tight ship with her kids, didn't she?
Yes, she does. Let me tell you what, you look at her 3 kids, and she never had any problems with any of them.
Seeing the world through those kids' eyes. No, y'all are very blessed. Not everybody's got great grandkids across the street.
And those, yeah, most of them they see them once or twice a year. We see ours 2 or 3 times a week.
So what is it? I know Uncle Ed always wanted to live to 100. What's your timeline, Norm?
You know, I live a day at a time right now, and I mean, I feel like I'm in pretty good health, but you know, an old man's like an old truck. Something breaks, you fix it, and something else breaks. So when they quit making the part that breaks, then you're in trouble.
And with you and Roland and you and Sonny, I mean, y'all go out there and grab a bite every once in a while. Tell me about
We
some-
do that. Roland, yeah, we still get out with some of our friends a lot. Yeah, I was telling Kay the other night, we got an invitation from a dance club, and I said, "Y'all need to change that to supper club. We don't dance anymore."
I remember Mom talking about that dance club that they hadn't danced in 15 years, but they hadn't changed the name.
Hadn't changed. You know, I was telling Kay too the other night. I says, "You know what was funny?" I says, "When we were young, we had a dance club, and the band would usually play till about 11, and we'd pick up a collection to keep them on till about 2. And now I'm home in time to see the 10 o'clock news." Times have changed. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of change, haven't you? Man on the moon, president shot, technology.
How about telephones?
Sometimes we wish we weren't always accessible, you know?
I'm not sure we weren't better off. I mean, it made kids think a little bit, made them, you know, you entertained yourself on what you did. I went to the restaurant the other night. Kay and I went over and got a hamburger at one of those burger places. And this young family comes in and they sit down in a booth next to us. And Kay and I sitting here and we're talking, and I look over there. The mom, the dad, and both kids are on a cell phone, and I'm thinking, hey guys, that's when you're supposed to be bonding with your kids, not.
Like how do your personality when you come to meet people and all that, Norman? I mean, like, you know, you always give people a shot. I mean, are you trustworthy?
I don't know who quoted the deal, but I don't think I've ever met a stranger. I usually initiate. I still do. We went out and got a pizza last night, and ended up being friends with the people at the next table on talking about things and all. Did Will Rogers say that? I never met a guy I didn't like.
I forget who said that.
I think it was Will Rogers, because I'm the Will Rogers of food. I never met a food I didn't like.
Did you have a pretty healthy relationship with food?
Man, Like I say, if it's there, I'll eat. Kay says, "What do you want?" I says, "Put it on the table, whatever it is." And that's kind of strange because my mom was such a fantastic cook that you think I'd be a little bit picky, but I'm not.
Same here. I always say, just give me something warm.
Me too. I remember when I was in college and didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, I'd go eat at Saban's. Jack Saban had a place on the corner of Highland Road and Chime Street. And the reason I go eat there every night was that they give you all the rolls you could eat. I think the La Cantilla serves that same kind of roll. That's why I go there often now. It reminds me of the old Saban's.
You know, I know you've been awarded many, recognitions over the years, Norman, but and those are all nice to have. But what would you say that some of the most important things? And you've mentioned God, family, faith, and you've been recognized. But what do you really want to be remembered by?
You know, I've tried to help a lot of kids. I think kids getting a good education is things. You know, when Steve got killed, I took all the funds that I had set aside from him that I was going to, to go to high school, to go to college rather than everything else, and started a scholarship fund. And to date, there've been over 150 kids who have had the opportunity of using that scholarship. That's probably one of the things that I like, and I always try to be supportive of the church and the Catholic schools.
They have one at St. George or just Catholic, huh? Yeah.
Well, the way they're set up, one kid at St. George gets a scholarship every year, and then 2 in the Diocese of Baton Rouge get one. So there are usually 3 kids in each grade at Catholic High every year that are benefit from the scholarship.
Is there any? We got 2 minutes, Norm. I know you feel like you talked your head off.
I just want to say thanks for sitting down with us and happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
I think people, especially great grandkids, would like to see this one time.
I hope I live long enough that my grandkids can remember me.